From Saving Private Ryan to Fury to countless action blockbusters, Hollywood has long loved the thunderous presence of tanks. Nothing screams war quite like a 60-ton machine tearing through the battlefield. But the problem? What you see on the big screen often has little to do with how these steel beasts actually worked in reality. Today, we're going to debunk 5 major myths about tanks that Hollywood won't stop repeating. These misconceptions have shaped the way millions of people think about armored warfare, but real tank crews, historians, and military engineers would tell you a very different story. Let's roll out. Myth 1. Tanks are invincible behemoths, Hollywood. Version in movies, tanks are practically unstoppable juggernauts. Bullets bounce off them harmlessly, artillery somehow misses, and lone soldiers firing machine guns are portrayed as hopeless against these metal monsters. Heroes often need airstrikes, rockets, or an entire platoon to take one out. The reality and truth, tanks were never invincible. Even during World War II, relatively small infantry weapons could destroy or disable them. German Panzer IVs, Soviet T-34s, and American Shermans all had vulnerable points. Handheld anti-tank weapons like the Panzerfaust, bazooka, and Piat could pierce armor with devastating results. Mines, artillery shrapnel, Molotov cocktails, and even terrain could render a tank useless. Crews often dreaded breakdowns as much as enemy fire. Mechanical reliability was as much a threat as the enemy's guns. A real example. During the Battle of Kursk, 1943, the largest tank battle in history, thousands of tanks clashed. Despite their massive numbers, tanks were knocked out in droves by mines, artillery, and handheld weapons. The myth of tank invulnerability was shattered on those Russian steppes. In short, tanks were powerful, yes, but they were never invincible. Myth 2. Tank battles were frequent and cinematic Hollywood. Version movies love dramatic tank versus tank duels. You'll see Shermans and Tigers dueling one-on-one like knights in armor, trading shells across picturesque landscapes. These duels are often portrayed as decisive moments that change the course of battles. The reality. The truth is much less glamorous. Actual tank-on-tank duels were relatively rare compared to other ways tanks were destroyed. The majority of tank losses came from artillery, mines, aircraft, or mechanical breakdowns, not other tanks. Tanks were not designed to hunt tanks. Their real job was supporting infantry, breaking defenses, and exploiting breakthroughs. Tank destroyers, artillery, and anti-tank guns were usually tasked with knocking out enemy armor. A real example, in World War II, the U.S. Sherman tank often faced the dreaded German Tiger I. Movies show Shermans hopelessly outmatched in duels. But in reality, Shermans rarely fought Tigers head-to-head. Air support, artillery, and overwhelming numbers were the true equalizers. For every one Tiger, dozens of Shermans were produced. In short, tank duels happened, but not in the Hollywood, Wild West showdown style. Myth 3. Tank interiors were spacious and comfortable. Hollywood version in war films, tank crews are often shown moving around with surprising ease. Characters can turn to one another, point at maps, and deliver long speeches inside roomy, well-lit interiors. The reality step into a real tank, and you'll instantly see the difference. Tank interiors were cramped, suffocating, and claustrophobic. Crews were packed shoulder to shoulder in dark, noisy, grease-smelling steel boxes. Temperatures could soar above 100 degrees Celsius, and ventilation was minimal. The roar of the engine, the clank of gears, and the deafening boom of the main gun made communication nearly impossible without intercom headsets. Many veterans described it as a steel coffin. A real example, Soviet T-34s were notorious for their cramped interiors. Crewmen often had to enter barefoot or remove their gear just to fit inside. The American Sherman was considered more comfortable, but even then, 4 or 5 men inside created unbearable heat and discomfort during long operations. In short, real tanks were nightmares to live in, not roomy film sets. Myth 4. Tanks. Always fired accurately and quickly, Hollywood version on screen, Tanks seem like precision sniper rifles. The gunner swings the turret, lines up the crosshairs, and with a single dramatic shot, boom! The shell perfectly strikes its target, usually exploding in a massive fireball. The reality in reality, tank gunnery was slow, difficult, and often inaccurate. Early tanks had poor optics, crude targeting systems, and unstable platforms. Hitting. A moving target at more than 800 to 1,000 meters was extremely difficult. Crews had to manually range targets, adjust for wind and motion, and reload heavy shells, all while under fire. Hollywood's love for fiery explosions is also misleading. Many tanks hit by shells didn't explode in cinematic fireballs. Often, the result was a punctured hull, injured crew, or mechanical failure. Fires happened, but they weren't guaranteed. A real example. During the Normandy campaign, Allied tank crews frequently reported missing German tanks with their first shots. German optics were superior, but even then, engagements were chaotic, fast and uncertain. Tank warfare was messy, not the clean precision duels seen in films. In short, tanks were powerful weapons. But precision and instant kills were more Hollywood fantasy than battlefield reality. Myth 5. Tanks always led the charge and won the war. Hollywood version films often portray tanks as the decisive factor in battle, the mighty spearhead that breaks enemy lines and wins the day. Heroes climb into tanks, smash through defenses, and single-handedly change the outcome of a battle. The reality, while tanks were crucial, they were never independent war winners. Tanks needed combined arm support, infantry, artillery, engineers, and air cover to operate effectively. Without infantry, tanks were vulnerable to close-range ambushes. Without engineers, they were helpless against mines or obstacles. Without air support, they were sitting ducks for dive bombers. The myth of the lone tank charge is pure cinema. Real victories came from coordinated strategies, logistics, and overwhelming production capacity, not just tank heroics. A real example, in 1940, Germany's Blitzkrieg wasn't just tanks charging forward, it was tanks working with motorized infantry, artillery, and close air support. Tanks were the tip of the spear, not the spear itself. In short, tanks were vital, but they didn't win wars alone.